The world's most wanted man has stepped out of the shadows once more to taunt US President George W. Bush and his European allies. Osama bin Laden's usual call for global jihad to the Muslim world has changed, and this time he has directed his message to Europeans. He calls on them to urge their leaders to break ranks with the United States and end the war against the Taliban in Afghanistan. Despite a massive manhunt and a $25 million bounty on his head, bin Laden has evaded capture. Since the October 2001 war in Afghanistan, he has regularly taunted the Bush administration by releasing provocative tapes. Today's agenda asks the question, Osama bin Laden, what is he planning next? The most wanted man on the planet has just released a new message to the world and now appears to be projecting himself as a peace broker, appealing directly to Europeans this time and not Muslims. Our studio lineup today will help us pick through the Al-Qaeda leader's latest broadcast. Our first guest is Dr. Kamal Helbawi, chairman of the think tank, the Center for the Study of Terrorism. He is also an expert in the war on terror. Joining him is Saudi Arabia's best-known dissident, Dr. Muhamed Almsari, who lives in exile in London. He runs the Committee for the Defense of Legitimate Rights. Our third guest is Alex Bigham, head of communications and projects at the Foreign Policy Center. He heads up the FPC's research programs on Iran, Iraq and Pakistan and has been involved in research on the EU, the special relationship, faith and foreign policy. If I come to you first, Alex, what's your assessment of this latest audio message?
Well, I think it's obviously an attempt by bin Laden to try and divide Europe and America. I don't think it's an attempt that's going to be terribly successful. I think this idea of him as a peace broker is frankly laughable. I don't think anyone would take his offer of a truce with European voters or European governments seriously when he's obviously continuing to plan operations. His organisation is continuing to plan operations. I think the question, what is he planning next? Well, unfortunately, what he's planning next is further terrorist atrocities, not just in Iraq and Afghanistan, but potentially in Europe and other places across the world.
Dr. Masri, would you agree with that?
I beg to differ, because first of all, he did address the European and American public before indirectly. For example, many people credit him for George W. Bush being elected the second time because he timed a certain message which Bush invested for his own re-election.
What, you're saying that bin Laden wanted George Bush in for a second term?
Every analyst in the background of Al-Qaeda and the networks, all of them were praying that Bush stays because they know Bush will stick to his own agenda. He will get himself dig himself deeper in Afghanistan and in Iraq, which he did. And maybe he will dig himself also in Darfur in due course, which will cause for the United States severe and grave harm, because if independent of what Alex says, victory is not outside, it's actually defeat is outside, not victory for the United States, which would be a major world event, which bin Laden has been envisioning, not believing it will ever happen, but he's quite surprised that it's happening.
So what was the aim of this message?
I think the aim is definitely trying to move the public, and I think also our learned friend is very pessimistic about the European public. We know about this questionnaire, which was, I think, latest was 2006 or 2005. What is the biggest danger for the world peace? And number one was the US, by European point of view, and number two was Israel. So the European public is not as pro-American and pro-Israel as maybe the politicians think or want to sell to the ones in charge. So I think the message will have an effect. It had a bit of effect in the action in Madrid. Whatever positive or negative we evaluate the reality only. Had an effect on the election, and this may have some effect. Some positive or negative effect, but it will have an effect.
Well, I would imagine your people will be working overtime on this broadcast. the Center for the Study of Terrorism?
Yes. I think that Osama bin Laden is crying to make the European people, in specific, aware of the serious situation in Afghanistan.
Is he going to blame them? I mean, Alex...
He's not blaming them at present.
At present?
Yes, but he wants them to be aware of the difficult situation after so many years of occupation and the fighting and the killing. That is his main message to them, and he wanted to remind them that America, claiming to be the first defender of human rights, are killing children, and are killing women, and are killing elderly, and are killing civilians in Afghanistan. This is another part of his message that he did in this very interesting message. And it indicates that he is trying another way of finding solutions to the problem of Afghanistan and releasing the Afghans from any blame of what had happened in New York.
Which swings us back to the role of peace broker, and Alex is looking quite stunned here, but before we bring you back in, let's just remind ourselves about Osama bin Laden and his notorious tapes. The Sheikh of Terror has released a new message to the world, and it's quite different from anything he has said before. This time he has targeted Europeans as his audience instead of the Muslim world. And the former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi is mentioned by Osama bin Laden for the first time. The Al-Qaeda chief also vents his anger at former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, his successor Gordon Brown, Spanish former PM José María Aznar, and current French leader Nicolas Sarkozy. He accuses them of acting like puppets with the Bush administration over the decision to invade Afghanistan. It is no longer a secret, says bin Laden, that Blair, Brown, Berlusconi, Aznar and Sarkozy and their supporters love to remain in the shadow of the White House. And in this they are not that different to leaders of many third world countries, he adds. He calls on Europeans to urge their leaders to break ranks with the United States and end the war against the Taliban. The Al-Qaeda leader also stated clearly he was behind the 9/11 attacks, which led to the invasion of Afghanistan, and said Afghans had no knowledge whatsoever